You know what's crazy? Back in the 1980s, Thanksgiving wasn't about $80 turkeys or fancy Pinterest tablescapes. It was about families making magic out of next to nothing, turning a few cans, a cheap bird, and a whole lot of love into a feast that could feed a small army. Moms stretched every dollar, dads carved every bite, and somehow everyone left the table full and happy. In this video, we're going back to that golden era, when flavor mattered more than flash, to uncover 30 cheap Thanksgiving dinners from the 1980s that can still feed your big family today without breaking the bank. Because if our parents could pull off a full feast for under $25 back then, maybe the secret to surviving 2025 is hiding right in their recipes. Stay till the end. The last dish isn't just nostalgic, it might save your next Thanksgiving. 1. Butter-basted turkey roll with stuffing center. Before there were air fryers and gourmet brines, there was this, the 1980s shortcut turkey, a humble roll of white meat wrapped around stovetop stuffing and basted with margarine until glossy and golden. You'd find it in the freezer section at Safeway, or maybe your mom's handwritten recipe book right next to Jell-O mold number 3. Families loved it because it solved 3 problems at once: no carving a massive bird, no waste, and no all-day oven babysitting. Just thaw, roll, tie with string, and let that parquet-basted skin crisp under the broiler. When sliced, each round showed a perfect spiral of turkey and stuffing, like a deli pinwheel dressed up for Thanksgiving. Kids thought it looked fancy, moms knew it was cheap, and dads were just glad dinner was on time. The smell of butter, sage, and toasted breadcrumbs filled every inch of a ranch-style kitchen while Wheel of Fortune played in the background. Here's the wild part. Back then, this whole meal could feed 6 for under $8. Try doing that today. Even with today's prices, you could still pull it off for around $20 using store brands. But the secret ingredient wasn't the butter. It was the attitude. Make it work, make it warm, make it feel like home. And that's what 80s cooking was all about. Because the next dish? It didn't need a turkey at all, just a few legs, a packet of soup mix, and a little kitchen faith. And maybe that's why this recipe keeps coming back. Not for the flavor, but for the feeling. Every bite tastes like the kind of holiday when money was short, but love was endless. It's proof that sometimes the simplest meals leave the longest memories. 2. Oven-baked turkey legs in onion gravy. Before turkey legs became theme park food on a stick, they were the blue-collar centerpiece of 1980s Thanksgivings across America. Moms on a budget knew the secret. Skip the breast meat, grab the dark meat, and no one would ever notice once the gravy hit the table. Picture this: the oven door fogged with steam, the air thick with that unmistakable mix of onion soup mix and cream of mushroom soup. It wasn't fancy, but man, it was good. The legs came out fall-apart tender, their skin bronzed from margarine, the gravy bubbling up around them like molten gold. You could smell it from the driveway. Kids didn't know they were eating the cheapest cut in the store, 49 cents a pound back then. What they tasted was comfort. A big roasting pan, maybe a few chipped plates, and everyone crowding around saying, "Pass the gravy one more time." In 2025, you can still find turkey legs for a steal, around $1.50 a pound. That means you can feed 6 people for under $15, and it'll taste better than most $80 restaurant birds. Because this wasn't just food, it was survival dressed up as celebration. And when that last spoonful of gravy hit the mashed potatoes, nobody cared about fancy plating or Instagram lighting. The flavor was pure nostalgia, rich, salty, creamy, and real. But what came next was even bolder. A dish that looked straight out of a magazine cover, yet came from a can and a dream. It was the kind of meal that reminded families what really mattered. Not the price tag, but the time spent together. Even now, one whiff of that onion gravy can send you right back to Grandma's kitchen. Because sometimes the cheapest meals are the ones that taste most like home. 3. Brown sugar ham slices with pineapple rings. If there was ever a dish that screamed holiday glam on a dime, this was it. The brown sugar ham with pineapple rings, the 1980s way of saying, "We may not have much, but dinner still looks like a postcard." You remember the look, shiny pineapple circles pinned down with toothpicks, a cherry winking from the center, and ham slices bubbling beneath a glaze of brown sugar and cloves. That sticky, sweet smell filled the kitchen before anyone even heard the timer ding. For under $5, families pulled off a centerpiece that sparkled like a magazine spread. It was the decade of presentation. Moms served it on floral platters, maybe with a sprig of parsley for garnish. But what made it special wasn't the look. It was the ritual. The way Dad spooned glaze over the meat while Mom basted the pineapple, both humming to Kenny Rogers playing on the radio. The flavor? That perfect collision of salty ham, sweet syrup, and caramelized edges that stuck to the fork. It was elegant, affordable, and made everyone feel like company had come to town, even if dinner was just you, the kids, and a $3.99 pack of sliced ham from A&P. In 2025, this whole dish still costs less than a drive-through order, around $12 for 6 servings, and looks like a feast. It's proof that you don't need truffle butter or heirloom herbs to make something special. Just a can of pineapple, a little brown sugar, and a whole lot of heart. But not every family could even afford ham. Some had to get creative, and what they came up with next turned desperation into a delicious tradition. 4. Ground beef and cornbread. Thanksgiving casserole. Now, here's where the 1980s got truly creative. The ground beef and cornbread Thanksgiving casserole. For families who couldn't swing a turkey, this was the make-it-work miracle that still brought everyone running to the table. Imagine Mom layering it in that old Pyrex dish, a base of seasoned ground beef sizzling with onions and a can of corn, then a golden blanket of Jiffy cornbread mix poured right on top. It baked into something glorious, crisp edges, soft center, a bubbling aroma that smelled like both dinner and dessert at once. When she pulled it from the oven, you could hear the crust crackle as the steam rose. It wasn't turkey, but it felt like Thanksgiving. The secret was love and canned goods. A box of Jiffy was 39 cents, a pound of ground beef, maybe $1.19. The whole thing fed a family of 6 for under $4. Nobody cared it didn't have drumsticks. It had flavor, it had warmth, it had home. And somehow, that casserole always disappeared faster than the turkey ever did. Kids fought for the corners, the crunchy pieces soaked with gravy or ketchup. Leftovers didn't last past breakfast. Cold squares were eaten right from the pan with a fork. Dad called it cowboy cornbread, and Mom just smiled. She knew she'd stretched 1 pound of meat into 2 days of memories. In 2025, you can still recreate it for under $12. And honestly, it'll taste just as good. Because the cornbread captured everything that made 80s kitchens magical. Thrift, creativity, and that stubborn belief that you didn't need much to make people happy. And for families lucky enough to have a little turkey left over, what they made next stretched every last bite into something even more comforting. 5. Turkey and rice. Bake with cream of celery soup. When Thanksgiving ended in the 1980s, the real creativity began, turning leftovers into something that could stretch for days. And nothing did it better than the turkey and rice bake with cream of celery soup. You'd open the fridge and see bits of turkey breast, maybe a few wings, a scoop of peas from the night before, all headed for the trash if Mom didn't step in. But she had a plan. Out came the Pyrex dish, a can of Campbell's cream of celery soup, and that trusty box of instant rice. Within minutes, the kitchen was filled with that familiar hum, the scrape of a spoon, the pop of a soup can, the smell of butter hitting the pan. It was humble but genius. The soup turned into a silky sauce, coating every grain of rice and piece of turkey in a cozy, savory blanket. Sprinkle some breadcrumbs on top, bake till golden, and suddenly leftovers felt like a brand-new meal. Back then, this dish cost maybe $3 total, and it could feed 8. In 2025, you can still make it for around $10 if you shop smart. And the best part? It freezes beautifully. Families didn't talk about meal prepping in the 80s. They just called it Tuesday night. And when that creamy, bubbling casserole hit the table, it didn't matter that it started as scraps. It felt like Thanksgiving all over again. But sometimes, when even turkey scraps ran out, immigrant families brought something heartier, a dish that crossed oceans and generations to save dinner. When that casserole came out of the oven, the edges browned just enough to crunch under a spoon. Steam fogged the kitchen windows, and the whole house smelled like comfort and Sunday afternoons. Dad would sneak a bite straight from the dish, pretending to check if it's done, while the kids hovered with paper plates. By the time everyone sat down, the rice had soaked up every drop of creamy soup, turning thrift into something that tasted rich. This was more than leftovers. It was a second chance at Thanksgiving. Every bite reminded families that good cooking didn't need a recipe card, just resourcefulness and love. And when you heated the last portion days later, it still tasted like home. 6. Stuffed cabbage rolls in tomato sauce. Before the word fusion ever hit American kitchens, immigrant families in the 1980s were already living it. For those from Polish, Ukrainian, or Hungarian roots, stuffed cabbage rolls in tomato sauce were the real heart of Thanksgiving when turkey just wasn't in the budget. Picture a worn Formica countertop, a big pot steaming, and a mom carefully peeling cabbage leaves one by one. Inside each leaf went a handful of rice, a scoop of ground beef or pork, maybe a little onion and garlic powder. No fancy seasonings, just pantry staples and patience. Once rolled tight, the whole batch went into a roasting pan and got covered with canned tomato sauce, tangy, rich, and sweetened with a pinch of sugar. The magic happened in the oven. As it baked, the cabbage turned tender, the sauce thickened, and the smell filled the house with that someone's home feeling. It wasn't traditional Thanksgiving, but for immigrant families it was better. It was survival seasoned with love. A head of cabbage in 1983 cost 25 cents. A can of tomato sauce? 33 cents. The entire dish fed 8 people for under $3. Today, you could still make it for under $10, proof that flavor doesn't follow inflation. When those rolls hit the table, even kids who swore they hated cabbage grabbed seconds, because it wasn't about the leaf, it was about the story inside it. Each roll told a tale of journey, adaptation, and pride. But next up came something uniquely American, a dish born straight from the golden age of boxed convenience. Every bite carried history, the struggle, the sacrifice, and the sweet victory of making something from nothing. It was food that didn't just fill stomachs, it preserved culture. And in kitchens like these, gratitude wasn't spoken. It was simmered, rolled, and served with sauce. 7. Chicken and stovetop stuffing bake. If there was ever a dish that defined 1980s comfort cooking, this was it. Chicken and stovetop stuffing bake, the creamy, no-fail miracle that graced nearly every suburban table from Ohio to Oregon. It was fast, filling, and proudly made with boxes and cans, because back then, that was convenience food done right. Picture Mom in her pastel kitchen, cordless phone cradled to her shoulder, mixing diced chicken with a can of cream of chicken soup while chatting with Aunt Linda about Black Friday sales. On the counter sat the red box of stovetop, that iconic smell of butter, sage, and nostalgia just waiting to hit the oven. She'd layer it like lasagna, chicken, soup, stuffing, repeat. Then bake until it bubbled around the edges and filled the whole house with that warm, savory scent that said, "Dinner's ready." It wasn't gourmet, but it was glorious. The top came out crispy, the center soft and creamy, and every bite felt like a hug. Back in 1985, you could make this for under $5 total. Today, even with inflated prices, it's still one of the cheapest ways to feed a crowd, about $12 for 6 hearty servings. The beauty of this dish was its simplicity. No measuring, no timing stress, no carving knife. just one casserole dish and 30 minutes to dinner. For working parents juggling shifts or carpools, that mattered. And when you spooned that first scoop onto a plate beside green beans and cranberry sauce, you didn't miss the turkey one bit. You just tasted comfort. But some families took budget turkey even further, down to the scraps, bones, and wings, and somehow turned them into something unforgettable. 8. Turkey necks and wings braised in pan drippings. This was the meal that proved you didn't need the whole bird to taste like Thanksgiving. Turkey necks and wings braised in pan drippings. To 1980s, families on a tight budget, these scrap cuts weren't leftovers. They were a blessing. You'd see them piled cheap in the meat case at the grocery store, often marked down to 39 cents a pound. Moms knew exactly what to do. They'd toss them into a roasting pan, brown them in a spoonful of margarine, then pour in the pan drippings from the big bird, or, if there was no bird that year, a can of cream of mushroom soup and a packet of onion soup mix. The oven did the rest. Hours later, the smell hit you first. Roasted onions, buttery gravy, and that deep turkey aroma that made the house feel alive. The wings came out falling apart, the necks tender enough that even the pickiest kids fought for a piece. And that gravy? It was liquid gold. Served over instant mashed potatoes, it could turn the simplest dinner into a feast. In 1984, you could make this meal for under $3. In 2025, it's still one of the best-kept secrets of thrift cooking. Feed a family of 6 for under $10, and they'll swear you spent all day on it. It wasn't about impressing guests or serving perfection. It was about using everything. Every scrap, every drop, every bit of flavor the turkey had to give. And when even turkey wasn't in the picture, some families reached for a true American standby, the ultimate stretch meal that never failed to fill the house and the heart. 9. Meatloaf with ketchup glaze and fried onions. Ah, the meatloaf with ketchup glaze, the unsung hero of every 1980s dinner table. For families who skipped the turkey, this was the dish that kept Thanksgiving alive in spirit, if not in price. It was humble, hearty, and could feed an army on a pound of ground beef and a few pantry staples. You could always tell it was baking by the smell, that sweet tang of ketchup caramelizing on top, mixed with onions frying in the pan. Moms would mix the meat by hand in a giant bowl, breadcrumbs, eggs, Worcestershire, and whatever spices were left in the cupboard. She'd press it into the loaf pan like she was sculpting gold, smooth it over with a butter knife, and top it with that shiny red glaze. When it came out, it was a masterpiece. Juicy, rich, the glaze bubbling at the corners. Served with instant mashed potatoes and a side of green beans, it felt like Thanksgiving, even if it cost under $5 total in 1985. And yes, the kids always fought for the end slice, the one with the crispy edges and that sticky ketchup crust. Today, you can still make this whole meal for about $11, and it'll fill your kitchen with the same aroma that once made the dog sit up at the first whiff. The beauty of it was simple. You didn't need fancy ingredients, just care. When you poured the last of the onion gravy over that slice, it didn't matter that there was no turkey on the table, because the next dish turned yesterday's turkey scraps into something even more comforting, the meal that made leftovers legendary. Every family had its own meatloaf twist, a secret spice, a splash of milk, or just the right brand of ketchup that made it Mom's. And no matter how many casseroles followed, that glossy loaf remained the symbol of thrift done right. Proof that love could be baked for pennies and still taste like pride. 10. Turkey pot pie with biscuit crust. If Thanksgiving had an encore, it was this, the turkey pot pie with biscuit crust. The dish that turned scraps and seconds into a second celebration. By Sunday evening, every 1980s fridge looked the same. A few containers of leftover turkey, half a can of peas, maybe a little gravy clinging to the bottom of a Tupperware bowl. And that's all Mom needed to make magic. She'd start by melting margarine in her favorite skillet, scraping in the leftover gravy, and stirring in cream of chicken soup until it turned into a rich, creamy sauce. Then came the chopped turkey, frozen peas, and carrots. Whatever was left got tossed right in. The smell alone could bring the kids back to the kitchen, peeking over her shoulder like it was a science experiment. But the real star? That golden biscuit crust. No rolling pins, no dough stress, just popping open a can of Pillsbury biscuits, laying them on top, and watching them rise in the oven until puffed and buttery. When she pulled it out, the filling bubbled up between the biscuits like molten gold, each bite a mix of soft bread, savory sauce, and tender meat. Back in 1984, this meal cost less than $4. Today, even with store-brand ingredients, it's still under $12, and it can feed 6 with leftovers. And that's what made it special. It wasn't a fancy recipe, it was a philosophy. Nothing wasted, everything loved. Every spoonful was a reminder that comfort didn't come from what you bought, it came from what you made together. But if you thought the casseroles were legendary, wait until you see what the '80s did with side dishes. One green bean at a time. 11. Green bean casserole with French fried onions. No dish screams 1980s Thanksgiving louder than green bean casserole, the crown jewel of canned creativity. Born from Campbell's soup ads and cemented in family tradition, this dish sat proudly on every table, usually in a glass Pyrex dish that had seen more holidays than the family dog. The magic formula was simple. 2 cans of green beans, 1 can of cream of mushroom soup, a splash of milk, and a handful of those crispy French fried onions that came in a tin and disappeared faster than candy. Moms would stir everything together, smooth the top, and slide it into the oven until it bubbled like a swamp of pure comfort. Then came the best part, sprinkling another layer of onions right before serving so the top stayed golden and crunchy. The first spoonful always broke that perfect crust, releasing a wave of creamy mushroom aroma and childhood memories. It didn't matter if you were rich or broke, country or city. Everybody had this casserole. It united America one bite at a time. In 1986, this dish cost about $2.75 total. Today, even with inflation, you can still make it for under $8, and it'll taste identical. The secret hasn't changed: salty, crispy, creamy, and just a little bit of chaos in every scoop. And if you were lucky, you got that corner scoop where the onions turned extra dark and sticky. That was the bite people fought for. But just when you thought you couldn't top green beans in soup, the 1980s came up with a side so sweet it might as well have been dessert. And it came covered in marshmallows. 12. Sweet potato casserole with marshmallows. Ah, the sweet potato casserole with marshmallows, the 1980s dish that walked the fine line between dinner and dessert, and nobody complained. It was the one that made every kid's eyes light up, the one you could smell the moment Mom cracked open the oven door: caramelized sugar, toasted marshmallow, and sweet buttery yams melting together into pure nostalgia. Back then, nobody peeled and roasted fresh sweet potatoes. Nope, it started with a can. Canned yams, mashed right in the bowl with margarine, brown sugar, and a splash of evaporated milk. A sprinkle of cinnamon if you had it, maybe a dash of nutmeg if you wanted to get fancy. Then came the best part, topping it all with a blanket of mini marshmallows. 5 minutes under the broiler, and the magic happened. Those marshmallows puffed, browned, and blistered into a golden crust that cracked with every spoonful. Sweet met salt, soft met crunch. And suddenly, Thanksgiving dinner turned into dessert before the turkey was even cold. It cost next to nothing. $1.89 for the yams, 69 cents for the marshmallows, 25 cents for sugar. A grand total of around $3.50 in 1984. Even today, you can make it for about $7, and it'll taste exactly the same. Because the flavor wasn't about price, it was about memory. Every bite was childhood in a casserole dish. And as families crowded around those avocado green tables, someone always said the same thing. Just a little scoop. Oh, wait, maybe one more. But next up was the ultimate comfort combo. Cheesy, creamy, and green as every Midwestern grandma's kitchen curtains. 13. Cheesy broccoli rice casserole. If you grew up anywhere between Kansas and Kentucky, you know this one by heart. Cheesy broccoli rice casserole, the unsung hero that glued every 1980s potluck and Thanksgiving table together. It was the side dish that said, "I might come from a box, but I taste like home." It started simple. A bag of frozen broccoli florets thawing in the sink, a pot of minute rice bubbling on the stove, and a block of Velveeta waiting on the counter like gold. Then came the can of cream of chicken soup, the secret sauce of the decade. Moms mixed it all together in a big yellow Tupperware bowl, poured it into a casserole dish, and topped it with crushed crackers or breadcrumbs for a little crunch. 30 minutes later, the house smelled like heaven, a mix of melted cheese, broccoli, and toasted topping. The kind of smell that made even vegetable-hating kids grab a plate. When it came out of the oven, you could see the cheese bubbling up at the edges, gooey and golden. Back in 1983, this whole dish cost about $3.75. In 2025, you can still make it for under $9 and feed a family of 6 with leftovers. The best part? It went with everything: turkey, ham, even meatloaf. This casserole wasn't just food, it was peace at the table. Nobody argued when this came out. Everyone just dug in, spoon after spoon, until the dish was empty and quiet satisfaction filled the room. But next came a side that wasn't quiet at all, bubbling, creamy, and layered with nostalgia and sliced potatoes. It was the great equalizer of the Midwest table, rich enough for Sunday dinner, cheap enough for every weekday night. Even now, one forkful can take you back to the carpeted dining room of your childhood home, because in every bite of that Velveeta-laced goodness, you can still taste the comfort of simpler times. 14. Scalloped potatoes with ham bits. If there was one dish that could turn scraps into something special, it was scalloped potatoes with ham bits, the quiet workhorse of 1980s Thanksgiving tables. This wasn't a side dish. It was a rescue mission for every leftover potato and sliver of ham from the week before. Mom would pull out her trusty metal slicer and cut the potatoes paper thin, stacking them like poker chips on the counter. Into the pan they went, layered with bits of ham, or, if times were lean, even chopped hot dogs, because waste wasn't an option. Then came the magic sauce: evaporated milk, condensed cream soup, a dab of margarine, and a shake of black pepper. Simple, honest, and impossible to mess up. As it baked, the kitchen filled with that slow-building scent of starch and salt, the kind that clung to the curtains for days. The top turned golden and crispy, while the inside stayed soft and creamy, each forkful pulling up ribbons of potato and just enough ham to make you feel lucky. In 1983, you could whip this up for under $3.50 and feed 8 people comfortably. Today, it's still under $10, proof that the best comfort foods never went out of budget. It wasn't about indulgence. It was about stretching, savoring, surviving with style. And when it hit the table next to the green beans and cranberry mold, no one thought cheap. They just thought, this tastes like home. But speaking of cranberry mold, that next dish didn't just taste like the 80s, it looked like the 80s too, bright, jiggly, and unapologetically festive. 15. Jell-O cranberry salad mold. Nothing said holiday in the 80s quite like a Jell-O cranberry salad mold, that glossy red centerpiece wobbling proudly in the middle of the table like a neon jewel. It wasn't just food, it was decoration. You could spot it next to the turkey, catching the light from the chandelier, and every aunt in the room whispered the same line. "Oh, isn't that pretty?" It started, of course, with a box of cherry or raspberry Jell-O, whatever color matched Mom's serving dish. Into the bowl went hot water, a can of jellied cranberry sauce, crushed pineapple, and, because this was the 80s, a handful of chopped celery for texture. She'd stir it with her favorite wooden spoon, pour it into that fancy mold pan, and slide it into the fridge overnight like a science experiment in progress. By morning, it was perfection, firm but jiggly, sweet but tangy, and that first spoonful cut through the richness of turkey and stuffing like magic. Kids poked it just to watch it wiggle, and adults took polite slices that somehow turned into seconds. It cost next to nothing, under $2 in 1982, maybe $6 today, but it delivered joy, color, and conversation every single time. You didn't need artisanal cranberry compote when Jell-O could make a masterpiece with a mixing bowl and a prayer. And when it slid out of the mold onto a bed of iceberg lettuce, shining under kitchen lights, it wasn't just a side dish. It was the moment. But after that sugary sparkle came the 80s secret weapon for instant comfort. Mashed potatoes so quick, so cheap, and so creamy, nobody cared they came from a box. 16. Boxed mashed potatoes with garlic butter swirl. In the 1980s, when time was short and money even shorter, boxed mashed potatoes with garlic butter swirl were nothing less than a miracle. Every family had that one orange box tucked in the pantry, the magic powder that could turn boiling water and milk into a steaming bowl of comfort in 5 minutes flat. Mom would whip them up while the turkey roll baked, the sound of the electric mixer humming over the clatter of dishes. The smell wasn't fancy, just butter, salt, and nostalgia. But when she dropped that last spoonful of garlic margarine on top and gave it a swirl, something happened. The flakes absorbed the flavor, the texture fluffed up, and suddenly those instant potatoes tasted homemade. Kids didn't know the difference, they just fought for the creamy middle scoop. Dad piled his high and flooded it with gravy until it looked like a small volcano erupting on his plate. And Grandma? She'd shake her head and say, "They're not real potatoes, but they'll do." Back then, a box cost 89 cents, enough to feed a family of 5. Today, you can still make the same dish for under $5. It's proof that you don't need fancy tools or organic spuds to create comfort, just a little butter and love. The best part? That buttery swirl wasn't about taste, it was about pride. Even instant food could feel special when made with care. And right next to it, another 5-minute wonder was sizzling on the stove, bright, buttery, and bursting with color straight from the can. It was more than mashed potatoes. It was a pause in the chaos, a taste of home that arrived faster than the worries of the day. Every spoonful felt like a thank you whispered in mashed form. And long after the plates were cleared, that garlic scent lingered, quiet proof that small things could still feel grand. 17. Canned corn and bell pepper. Medley. Sometimes the simplest side stole the whole show. And that's exactly what happened with the canned corn and bell pepper medley, a 5-minute wonder that lit up 1980s Thanksgiving tables like confetti in a pan. It started with 2 pantry heroes, a can of sweet corn and a lone green bell pepper sitting in the crisper drawer. Mom would drain the corn, dice the pepper into tiny squares, and toss it all into her favorite nonstick skillet with a pat of margarine. In moments, the kitchen filled with that unmistakable sizzle, sweet corn popping, butter browning, and the faint grassy scent of bell pepper rising in the air. It was cheap, quick, and colorful, 3 words that defined 80s cooking. The yellow and green together looked like sunshine on a plate, a cheerful break from all the brown casseroles and gravies. A sprinkle of salt, maybe a dash of sugar if Mom felt fancy, and dinner had its spark of brightness. Back in 1982, the whole thing cost under $1.25, and even in 2025, it still rings in at under $5. A side that proves simplicity never goes out of style. You didn't need herbs from the garden or imported olive oil. You just needed a skillet, a can opener, and 10 minutes before company arrived. This dish wasn't about showing off. It was about showing up. Because sometimes the best memories come from the meals you throw together at the last second. But the next dish? That one wasn't cooked on the stove. It was mixed in a bowl, chilled in the fridge, and sweet enough to make the kids eat their vegetables with a smile. 18. Carrot and raisin Miracle Whip salad. Bright, sweet, and just a little bit strange. The carrot and raisin Miracle Whip salad was the sunshine of every 1980s Thanksgiving table. It looked like dessert, tasted like childhood, and somehow made shredded vegetables feel exciting. Every mom had her own version, but the formula never changed. Grated carrots, a handful of raisins, a spoon or two of crushed pineapple, and the secret ingredient, Miracle Whip. Not mayo, not yogurt, Miracle Whip. That tangy sweetness tied it all together in a way only the 80s could get away with. She'd mix it in a glass bowl, chill it for an hour, and bring it out just as the turkey hit the table. It wasn't just a salad. It was color therapy. Those bright orange strands glistened under the dining room light, the raisins soft and juicy, the pineapple giving tiny bursts of sweetness. One bite, and you got cool, creamy, tangy, and crisp all at once. It was light, fun, and perfectly balanced next to all those heavy casseroles and gravies. Back in 1984, this cheerful side cost $2.25 total, maybe $6 in 2025. Cheap, fast, and surprisingly refreshing, it gave Thanksgiving dinner a bit of tropical flair, like Florida in a bowl. And while the adults debated football scores and family gossip, the kids snuck spoonfuls straight from the serving dish. Because if salad could taste like dessert, who could resist? It was the kind of dish that made even picky eaters smile, the crunch, the color, the sweetness. It didn't belong to any cookbook trend or diet. It belonged to memory. And even today, one bite of that tangy sweetness can take you straight back to a time when Miracle Whip made everything feel a little more special. 19. Macaroni and cheese bake with breadcrumb topping. If comfort had a sound, it would be the bubble of macaroni and cheese bake with breadcrumb topping coming out of a 1980s oven. This wasn't the boxed dinner of today, though yes, it started with Kraft. But moms back then knew how to turn that blue box into pure gold. First came the pasta, boiled just shy of done. Then the cheese sauce, bright orange, thick, and so fragrant it could lure kids from 2 rooms away. But the secret was the upgrade: a handful of shredded cheddar, a splash of milk, and a sprinkle of garlic powder stirred right in. She'd pour it all into a casserole dish, top it with buttery breadcrumbs or crushed Ritz crackers, and slide it into the oven until it bubbled around the edges and smelled like heaven. When it came out, the top was golden and crisp, the inside silky and molten. That first spoonful, crunchy crust giving way to creamy noodles, was enough to make even the turkey jealous. It was the great equalizer of Thanksgiving, rich enough for adults, simple enough for kids, cheap enough for everyone. Back in 1983, the whole dish cost $2.75. In 2025, you can still make it for about $7, and it'll feed 8 people with smiles all around. Because mac and cheese wasn't just a side, it was a tradition, the edible version of a warm hug. And here's the thing, no one ever argued over the last spoonful, they just shared it. The pan always came back scraped clean, its edges still warm from the oven. Long after the dishes were washed, that buttery smell lingered in the kitchen, a quiet reminder that some flavors never fade. 20. Canned peas with pearl onions and bacon drippings. This one smelled like home long before it hit the plate. Canned peas with pearl onions and bacon drippings, the quiet little side that carried the scent of every 1980s kitchen. You'd know it was coming the moment that leftover bacon fat hit the skillet, that rich, smoky hiss that said, "Dinner's almost ready." Mom would start by fishing a small jar of pearl onions from the back of the pantry, the kind she bought every year but only used at Thanksgiving. Into the pan they went, sizzling until translucent, before she poured in the drained canned peas. The drippings worked their magic, coating everything in a buttery glaze that shimmered green and gold under the stove light. A dash of salt, a twist of pepper. Done. It took 10 minutes, cost less than $1.50 back in 1984, and could feed a table of 8. Even today, you can make it for about $6, and it'll taste exactly like memory. Sweet peas, savory bacon, and the faint sweetness of those little onions. It wasn't a fancy recipe. It was instinct. Use what you have. Make it delicious. Feed everyone. That was the rhythm of every 80s Thanksgiving. And when you scooped a spoonful next to your mashed potatoes, the flavor wrapped around you like a flannel blanket. Every bite told a story of thrift and care, how nothing in the pan ever went to waste. The leftover bacon grease from breakfast became the secret weapon of dinner. It was a reminder that even the smallest scraps could turn into something beautiful. Because in the 80s, flavor didn't come from price, it came from resourcefulness. 21. Brown and serve dinner, rolls with margarine glaze. Before sourdough starters and artisan loaves took over, 1980s, Thanksgivings were ruled by one humble hero, brown and serve dinner rolls brushed with margarine until they shined like gold. Every mom had that same aluminum tray tucked in the freezer, ready for the big day. Pop the oven door, slide them in, and within minutes the house smelled like heaven itself. They weren't homemade, but they felt that way. The first whiff of that buttery steam could make even the grumpiest uncle smile. Kids hovered by the oven, watching the pale rolls turn golden, puffing up like little miracles. When Mom pulled them out, she'd grab her parquet tub, melt a quick spoonful in the microwave, and brush it across the tops until they glistened. That was the moment, the scent that meant dinner was about to begin. A tray cost $1.29 in 1983, enough to feed a family of 8. Today, you can still pull off the same warm basket for under $5. They were cheap, fast, and forgiving, ready when everything else ran late. And when you tore one open, the steam poured out like a sigh of relief. Those rolls weren't just bread. They were a promise. A pause between the chaos of the kitchen and the laughter of the table. A reminder that sometimes the smallest, simplest bite can be the one everyone remembers. Every family had its roll ritual, a pat of butter, a drizzle of honey, maybe a swipe of leftover gravy. It was the one thing that always disappeared first, no matter how much you made. Even after the plates were cleared, someone would sneak back for just one more. Because in the end, it wasn't about bread. It was about belonging. But the 80s weren't done stacking surprises, because the next dish took all those leftover bread cubes, added sausage, and turned side dish scraps into a show-stopping centerpiece. 22. Stuffing loaf with sausage and sage. This was where 1980s ingenuity met pure comfort, the stuffing loaf with sausage and sage. It looked like meatloaf, smelled like Thanksgiving, and fed twice as many people for half the cost. When Mom pulled it from the oven, you could hear that soft crackle as the crust formed, golden, herby, and full of promise. It started with leftover bread, heels, crusts, whatever sat forgotten on the counter all week. She'd cube it, toss it into a big bowl, and add a packet of boxed stuffing mix for good measure. Then came the flavor, crumbled breakfast sausage sizzling in a pan, onions browning just right, and a pinch of sage, the scent that could make any kitchen feel like November. Mixed together with a couple of beaten eggs and a splash of chicken broth, it turned into a dense, savory loaf that baked up hearty and aromatic. When sliced, each piece held that perfect balance of soft center and crisp edge, with sausage bits peeking through like confetti. Back in 1985, you could make this entire dish for under $3.75, and it could feed 8 hungry mouths. Even today, it's barely $9, and it tastes like nostalgia itself. It wasn't fancy. It wasn't delicate. It was real food, salty, satisfying, and made to stretch. This was survival disguised as celebration. Families didn't call it budget cooking, they called it dinner. And every bite reminded them that creativity was just another ingredient. But in the South, another bread ruled the table, golden, crumbly, and sweet enough to make you forget every store-bought roll you ever had. And when that stuffing loaf hit the table, it didn't just feed the family. It brought them closer. The sizzling sound when the knife cut through the crust made everyone pause for a second, leaning in to catch the aroma of sage and sausage. Even the leftovers, sliced and fried in a pan the next morning with eggs, turned into something legendary. It wasn't just thrift. It was tradition reinvented, proof that even the humblest scraps could taste like gratitude. 23. Cornbread with canned creamed corn. In the South, cornbread wasn't just a side, it was a statement. And in the 1980s, nothing said Grandma's kitchen like cornbread with canned creamed corn, warm, golden, and sweet enough to make every bite feel like a holiday. It started with a box of Jiffy Mix, the blue and white pantry staple that powered half the decade's dinners. Mom would pour it into a bowl, crack in an egg, add milk, and then, the twist, a full can of creamed corn. That single addition changed everything. The batter turned rich and glossy, the corn kernels adding bursts of sweetness and texture. Into a cast-iron skillet it went, sizzling in melted margarine before sliding into the oven. While it baked, the smell filled every corner of the house, a little sweet, a little salty, with that unmistakable corn perfume that made you instantly hungry. When it came out, the top had a buttery crust, the center soft and moist enough to crumble in your hands. In 1984, this comfort classic cost less than $2 to make. Today, it's still around $6, and one pan can feed 10 people if you cut it small, though no one ever does. Served with butter, honey, or just on its own, it tasted like sunshine baked into bread form. It wasn't about perfection, it was about plenty. It stretched meals, fed guests, and made even the cheapest dinner feel like a feast. And for families who didn't stop at bread, the next dish was even simpler. Noodles, butter, and black pepper, the unsung hero that caught every last drop of gravy. 24. Buttered egg noodles with cracked pepper. When the mashed potatoes ran out, and in big 1980s families they always did, buttered egg noodles with cracked pepper came to the rescue. Simple, fast, and satisfying, it was the kind of dish that reminded everyone why cheap didn't mean boring. It started with a bag of wide egg noodles, the kind that came in a crinkly plastic bag for 59 cents. Mom would toss them into a pot of boiling salted water while the last bits of turkey gravy simmered on the stove. When the noodles hit that perfect tender chew, she'd drain them, drop in a generous scoop of margarine, and stir until every ribbon gleamed gold. Then came the secret move, a heavy dusting of black pepper. Not a sprinkle, but a rainstorm. That pepper gave the whole dish warmth, bite, and the illusion that it had more ingredients than it really did. The smell was simple. Butter and comfort. It filled the kitchen in seconds. Served beside turkey, meatloaf, or just a fried egg, it stretched the meal and soaked up every bit of flavor left on the plate. Back in 1983, this dish cost less than $1. In 2025, it's barely $4 and still feeds 6 people in 10 minutes flat. But its real value wasn't in money, it was in memory. You'd twirl those noodles around your fork, sop up the gravy, and suddenly the chaos of a crowded house felt peaceful. Sometimes the best side dish was the one nobody planned, just butter, noodles, and the taste of home. But the 1980s had one more bread trick up its sleeve, a fun, pull-apart creation that turned every dinner into a hands-on celebration. 25. Canned biscuit pull-apart bread. You could hear it before you saw it, that famous pop of the biscuit can opening. In the 1980s, it was practically the soundtrack of every Sunday dinner and Thanksgiving morning. And when Mom reached for the rolling pin and melted margarine, you knew something special was coming. Canned biscuit pull-apart bread. This wasn't just bread, it was a party trick. She'd take those wobbly biscuit rounds, dip each one in garlic margarine, and layer them into a loaf pan like bricks of pure joy. Sometimes she sprinkled Parmesan, sometimes just a little dried parsley from a jar that had been in the cabinet since Carter was president. Into the oven it went, and 30 minutes later the kitchen smelled like an Italian bakery married a Southern diner. When it came out, the top was shiny and golden, the edges crisp and buttery, and the middle soft enough to melt in your hand. Everyone pulled off pieces before it even hit the table, kids, uncles, and anyone within arm's reach. Nobody waited for the knife. You just tore and dipped. Back in 1985, you could make the whole loaf for $1.50. Today, still under $5 and worth every penny. It wasn't about presentation. It was about togetherness. Every hand reaching for that warm, garlicky bread said, "We made it." It was messy, loud, and perfect, just like the decade itself. But no '80s Thanksgiving ended without dessert. And the next one? It was the smell of every holiday window fogged with cinnamon, nutmeg, and something baking that could only mean one thing: pie time. 26. Pumpkin pie with evaporated milk and Libby's mix. No dessert defined the 1980s. Thanksgiving table quite like pumpkin pie with evaporated milk and Libby's mix, smooth, spiced, and smelling like every good memory rolled into one slice. You didn't need a fancy recipe or a food processor. All you needed was a can opener, a whisk, and faith in the power of Libby's. Mom would line up the ingredients like clockwork: 1 can of pumpkin, 1 can of evaporated milk, 2 eggs, sugar, and that little orange spice tin that smelled like holidays: cinnamon, nutmeg, ginger, and clove. She'd whisk it all in a chipped mixing bowl and pour the golden orange filling into 2 store-bought crusts, because in the '80s, even shortcuts tasted homemade. The kitchen filled with that unmistakable scent: sweet pumpkin, buttery crust, and a whisper of spice curling through the air. You could hear the hum of the oven and the faint buzz of the football game in the background. When it came out, the filling was silky and firm, the crust flaking perfectly under each forkful. A dollop of Cool Whip, and it was perfection. Soft, sweet, and nostalgic enough to make everyone sigh after the first bite. In 1984, the entire pie cost $2.40 to make. In 2025, it's still about $8. A small price for the taste of home. Because pumpkin pie wasn't just dessert, it was ritual. You didn't skip it, you didn't alter it, you just served it, smiled, and said, "Same as last year," and that's exactly how we like it. But for families who wanted something lighter, creamier, and maybe just a little playful, the next dessert turned whipped topping and canned fruit into pure, sugary nostalgia. 27. Cool Whip ambrosia salad. Now this one, Cool Whip ambrosia salad, wasn't just dessert. It was a personality. Every 1980s potluck and Thanksgiving dinner had at least one pastel-colored bowl of it sitting proudly next to the pies. It was cold, fluffy, and unapologetically sweet, like someone decided to turn a cloud into food. Mom would start by pulling out that classic white tub of Cool Whip from the freezer, setting it on the counter until it softened just enough to stir. Then came the magic: a can of mandarin oranges, another of pineapple chunks, shredded coconut, a handful of mini marshmallows, and sometimes, if she was feeling fancy, a few bright red maraschino cherries on top. She'd mix it all together with a wooden spoon, humming along to Kenny Rogers or Dolly Parton playing on the radio. After a quick chill in the fridge, it was ready: cool, creamy, citrusy, and as light as nostalgia itself. Kids loved it because it tasted like dessert disguised as salad. Adults loved it because it reminded them of simpler times: church picnics, paper plates, and folding chairs around the TV. The cost? In 1983, maybe $2.75 for the whole bowl, enough to feed 10. In 2025, it's still under $7, and not a thing about it needs changing. Every bite bursts with that signature '80s flavor: sweet, tangy, and just a little bit silly. And when Grandma spooned it onto your plate, even after 2 helpings of turkey and potatoes, you didn't say no, because ambrosia wasn't just salad. It was family tradition covered in whipped topping. But for those who wanted chocolate instead of citrus, the next pie brought instant gratification, literally. 28th. Instant chocolate pudding pie with graham crust. If Thanksgiving in the 1980s had a quick win dessert, this was it. Instant chocolate pudding pie with graham crust. No oven, no stress, no mess. Just creamy perfection in under 15 minutes. Every mom knew the routine. Grab a pre-made graham cracker crust, tear open a box of Jell-O instant chocolate pudding, and whisk it with cold milk until it turned glossy and thick. The whole kitchen filled with that sweet cocoa scent that made you want to lick the spoon. She'd pour the pudding into the crust, smooth the top with the back of a spatula, and crown it with a mountain of Cool Whip, maybe dusted with a few chocolate shavings if company was coming. Then came the hardest part, waiting. It had to chill for at least an hour, which meant every kid in the house opened the fridge at least 10 times, just to check. When the pie finally set, that first slice cut clean through, crumbly crust, silky filling, and the lightest, fluffiest topping imaginable. It wasn't fancy, but it was perfect. In 1984, this no-bake wonder cost $2.10 total. Today, even with store prices, you can make it for under $7, cheaper than a single slice at any diner. It was the taste of instant gratification before smartphones ever existed. And the best part? It always looked store-bought, until someone tasted it and realized no bakery could make something this comforting. It was proof that effort didn't always equal quality. Sometimes love, a whisk, and a box mix were enough. Families learned that shortcuts didn't cheapen a meal, they made it possible. Because in kitchens where time and money were tight, this pie wasn't just dessert, it was victory on a plate. 29. Pineapple upside-down sheet cake. Few desserts could stop a conversation in its tracks like the pineapple upside-down sheet cake of the 1980s. It was the kind of dish that made every head turn when Mom brought it out of the oven. Glossy pineapple rings, ruby red cherries, and that buttery brown sugar glaze shimmering under the kitchen light. It began, as most 80s miracles did, with a boxed yellow cake mix. Into the pan went melted margarine, a heavy handful of brown sugar, then the pineapple slices arranged in perfect circles, each one crowned with a maraschino cherry like a jewel. The batter got poured right on top, and as it baked, the syrup bubbled up through the cake, soaking it in caramel sweetness. The smell was hypnotic, tropical fruit, butter, and sugar dancing together in the air. When it came out of the oven, the real magic happened, the flip. Every kid held their breath as Mom turned the pan upside down onto a platter and lifted it, slowly, dramatically, to reveal that golden mosaic of fruit and glaze. A chorus of oohs followed every time. Back in 1983, the entire cake cost about $3.25 to make. Even today, it's barely $9, and it still feeds a crowd like royalty. Sticky, sweet, and unapologetically retro, it was the dessert that made even the fanciest pies look plain. It wasn't about tropical flair. It was about flair, period. Because nothing said, "I care," like pulling off a perfect flip in front of your guests. And just when everyone thought dessert was done, the 80s ended the night with one last miracle. No oven, no hassle, and a taste so rich it could make you believe in instant cheesecake. 30. No-bake cheesecake with cherry pie filling. And here it was, the grand finale of every 1980s Thanksgiving dessert spread. No-bake cheesecake with cherry pie filling. No springform pans, no cracked tops, no stress. Just cool, creamy perfection born from a box, a can, and a dream. Mom would grab a pre-made graham cracker crust, still in its foil tin, and set it on the counter like a blank canvas. Then came the filling, softened cream cheese, dream whip, and a touch of sugar whisked together until it was cloud smooth. The first spoonful into the crust was always satisfying, thick, glossy, and just sweet enough to make you forget it never touched an oven. But the real magic came from that cherry pie filling, the deep red kind that came in a can with a label you could spot from across the aisle. She'd pour it right over the top, each cherry glistening like a jewel in the light. A quick chill in the fridge, and it was ready, creamy, tangy, and perfectly balanced by that burst of fruit. Back in 1984, this dessert cost about $2.85, the cheapest showstopper you could make. Even today, you can pull it off for under $8, and it still feels like luxury. Every bite was pure nostalgia, cool cream, buttery crust, and cherries sweet enough to silence a crowded table. It wasn't about impressing guests. It was about ending the night with a smile. One taste, and everyone leaned back, full, happy, and already asking for the recipe they'd never write down. Because that's what 1980s Thanksgiving really was. Simple food, shared stories, and the kind of comfort that never goes out of style. You know, looking back at those 30 cheap Thanksgiving dinners of the 1980s, you realize something powerful. It was never really about the recipes. It was about the resourcefulness. Moms and dads turning a few cans, a little butter, and a lot of love into feasts that felt grander than anything you could order today. Those dishes, from boxed potatoes to no-bake cheesecake, told the story of a decade that made more from less. Families laughed over instant gravy, shared second-hand Pyrex, and stretched every dollar without losing an ounce of warmth. That's what made the food taste so good. The care, the laughter, the "we'll make it work" attitude baked into every bite. And here's the truth. You can still do it. You can still feed your family big, beautiful meals without emptying your wallet. Because the real secret of 1980s Thanksgiving wasn't the butter or the casseroles, it was heart. So this year, dust off those old recipes. Try one or two. Feel that same warmth fill your kitchen again. If this trip back in time stirred up a memory, your mom's Pyrex dish, your grandma's green bean casserole, or that first bite of pumpkin pie, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe, give this video a like, and tell me in the comments which 80s Thanksgiving dish your family still makes today. Because the best way to honor the past is to cook it again.